Hello and welcome everybody to the BCCJ's Responsible Business Forum, Part 1, Planet. We're delighted to have a fairly large audience here online today for this event, which will focus on decarbonisation. So we've just seen some amazing footage there of the planet that we call home. And I think we're all very, very aware of the increasing regularity and intensity of the climate events happening here in Japan, typhoons, landslides, flooding. And so I think it's very much in our minds, this issue of climate. And today we're going to be looking at specifically decarbonisation, one of the major ways in which we need to be considering how we can combat climate change. And we have an incredible lineup of speakers today. I will introduce the first of those in just a moment. But just to give you an idea of the flow for today's event. So in a moment, I will hand over to Sue Kinoshita, who is the Minister Counselor for Economic Diplomacy at the British Embassy. And Sue will give us a bit of background from the British governmental perspective there on this topic. Then we will move into the panel discussion, and that will be very ably moderated by Heather McLeish, Director at EY. Heather will introduce the panelists at that point. There will be a Q&A after that. Then we'll move on to getting you involved in this conversation. We don't want it to be just about hearing from others. We want to actually give you the opportunity to be part of this conversation. So the second half will be a very interactive breakout session where you'll get a chance to work in groups with the other participants. So, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Sue Kinoshita. Sue, onegaishimasu.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and sorry to be a bit Toyota-like in my just-in-time approach to joining. I considered starting by sort of setting out what the problem is, why we're all here, but then concluded that actually I think most people know what the problem is, and that you are here more to think about solutions and how to get involved. So I'm going to stick with just one comment, which I think summarizes the scale and the urgency of the issue we face, which is that if we're going to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, which many, many governments around the world have signed up to, including the UK, including Japan, if we're going to meet those goals, the global transition to clean power needs to happen 4 times more quickly than it is at present. I think we all feel we're doing quite a lot. We read a lot about it. Our various governments are doing a lot, but it's not enough. We need to go 4 times faster. So we haven't got time to be idle. We need to be acting now. And of course, the prospects of economic recovery from the COVID-19 situation gives us a really good opportunity to do something. I think if any of us had our houses burnt down, if we needed to rebuild them, however much we loved that house, we would almost certainly rebuild it slightly differently. We would come up with improvements, ways of making it better, more efficient, more useful, and more sustainable. And that's exactly the situation that we are in now. Our economies are needing a bit of TLC to get back on track. Let's try to do that in a way that is sustainable and greener and more resilient. That's better. So that's the challenge, but also the opportunity. And what I'd like to do now is just say a little bit about the role of government, and in particular some of the things that the UK government has been doing and will be doing, but then critically also the role of business and how I think we can work together. So I think that the principal role for government is to set the direction, to set the ambition, set the targets, and be clear about where we should be going, both domestically, but also internationally. And I think the UK has got a pretty good record on that. You'd expect me to say that, but I think it is genuinely true. we were the first major economy to legislate for becoming net zero by 2050. And we have some very strong indicators on the way to that as well. So the direction of travel is really clear. And we want to extend that to the global community as well. And it's one of the reasons that we've put up our hands to host COP26, which we would have been building up to right now. But of course, that has been postponed until November next year. But through that, we aim to ramp up ambition right across the world towards a climate resilient, zero carbon economy. And we are aiming for all countries to submit much more ambitious targets, nationally defined contributions targets for 2030, which will drive further cuts in emissions. But we also want as many as possible to sign up to reaching net zero emissions as soon as possible. Ideally 2050, but if not, as soon as possible thereafter, which is the formulation that the Japanese government is using. And just again to sort of frame perhaps the subsequent discussion, we've picked up 5 particular themes which are going to run through our COP26 presidency. They are clean energy, clean transport, nature-based solutions, including things like tree planting would be the obvious one, adaptation and resilience, a real issue for developing countries that are at the front line of some of the impacts of climate change. And finally, and tying everything together, finance, green finance. So that's the first role of government, setting the direction and the context. The second, of course, is to put the right policies in place to encourage the right types of investment, the right kinds of innovation, and to disincentivize actions and decisions that are not in line with our climate goals. And again, I think the UK has got a very good record there, whether it's through carbon pricing or many other measures. Over the past 10 years, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 28%. Can't be complacent, as I said, 4 times faster, but it's a good start. We've increased our renewable electricity generation 5-fold, so just in 10 years, 5 times the amount of renewables. And in the process have created hundreds of thousands of low carbon jobs. And another statistic that we're all very proud of is that having been the country that first introduced the world to coal and used it to fuel our industrial revolution, we are now amongst the first to be moving away from coal. And earlier this year, we notched up 67 days consecutively without coal. First time that's happened since the 19th century. So another good measure of the effectiveness of the policies that the government has put in place. So what can BCCJ do as businesses operating in Japan? The first thing to say is that I know that many of your member companies have already made some really strong commitments on the path towards net zero. It's a bit invidious to name specific companies, but I will. I know, for example, that Arup has made a commitment to be a net zero organization by 2030. And I know that AstraZeneca's ambition zero carbon strategy is set to eliminate emissions by 2025. That's a really ambitious target. And to be carbon negative across their entire supply chain by 2030. So some great examples there of BCCJ member companies really showing the way. And that's just the ones beginning with A. So I'm sure we'll hear more from other participants later. And actually, we in the embassy are really interested in hearing your stories. We have a mission here to try to move the debate on climate here in Japan. We can't do that alone, but the more voices who are joining with us, and the more case studies we have, and the more inspiring stories that we have to tell, the more effective our campaign can be. So please do let us know about what your companies are doing. We also want to spur innovation, we want to scale up new technologies, and ultimately work with Japan towards achieving our goals. So again, really keen to involve your companies in those discussions, where are the most promising technologies where can we learn from Japan, and where can we offer our expertise to Japan. And then finally, I just wanted to mention some of the many initiatives that are out there that companies can sign up to. You might feel that your company alone can't really make a difference, but if we all pull together, the impact will be that much greater. So I know some of you have already signed up to the Business Ambition for 1.5 Degrees, Our Only Future campaign, which companies sign up to address the climate emergency by committing to science-based targets aligned with a 1.5 degree trajectory towards ultimately a net zero future. And I know that many of you are involved in the RE100 campaign. That's a slightly easier, slightly catchier campaign title, RE100, which is a commitment to 100% renewable sources by 2050. And others of you will have committed to the EV100 initiative to commit to all the vehicles that you own or operate being zero emission by 2030. Please, if you've not heard of these, do look them out, consider signing up, and talk to your business partners, your suppliers, people around you, and try to influence them to sign up as well. So ultimately, whatever route you take, we want to ask you and those around you to join the Race to Zero campaign, which was launched back in June as part of the COP26 build-up. And that is the largest ever alliance of businesses and non-state actors who are committed to reaching net zero by 2050 at the latest. With a lot of organisations signed up already, we would love to have more. Already it represents over half of global GDP and covers nearly a quarter of our collective CO2 emissions. So a really good illustration of how lots of small contributions joining together can have a really big impact. And I hope that will be the outcome from today, that we share lots of great ideas and that people who have not yet committed to this path will be inspired to do so, and that by all joining together our own contributions, we will collectively be able to move closer to those Paris targets. Thank you very much, and look forward to the rest of the event.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. It was really fascinating to hear about what is the government perspective on this, and very encouraging to hear the stories from the UK side as well. And totally agree with you that this has got to be a collaborative effort. We've all got to get involved. I think it's important for us to remember that even as solo entrepreneurs, we have a carbon footprint. Whatever size of organization we're in, we have an impact and therefore a responsibility to be part of the solution, but it requires collaboration. So thank you very much for your input there. And I will now hand over to Heather McLeish, who will introduce the panelists and take it from here. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking this time during your lunchtime while you're diligently working from home, most likely, or from the office as we all start to make our changes and go back. That's what we are. We're resilient people. And that's part of what we're talking about today. Some of the things that we used to do in the past, the way we used to run our businesses in the past, don't really work for the current environment. And I think we've seen that be the case in our current climate crisis. We need to be more innovative. We need to think of better ways of managing our business. I think Sue put it brilliantly, from industrial revolution to the first countries to be declaring a climate crisis at all. What worked in the past might not work in the future, so we need to move forward. I've had already one comment from one of our participants that if we had the Star Trek Enterprise Class D, we would probably be able to solve some of our climate problems. But unfortunately, we do not have such technology at the moment. So what we do need to do is look at our individual efforts. As mentioned before, if I haven't met you, my name is Heather McLeish. I'm a director with EY Japan. I focus on global business development for some of our large insurance clients and also focus on their sustainability agenda. As we know, many Japanese companies are very forward thinking. We've never had to explain to a Japanese company why they should be paying attention to these things. They're always struggling, as we are probably today, with how. So we want to get into that how. I have three distinguished and very, very different panelists for you with three very different points of view. I have Katsuhiko Manabe from Renewable Japan, actually representing a couple of hats. I have Jennifer Sankaguchi from Rio Tinto, and I have Tadashi Tago-san from FTSE Russell. So I'd like them to each give a just 1 minute self-introduction before we dig in. And before we do that, you are absolutely encouraged to ask questions. We do ask that everyone is muted until we open up officially for questions. However, if you have a burning question and you don't want to forget it, please do put it in the chat box located down below, just in the chat, and you can pop the question to a specific panelist, or if you're shy, put it to the BCCJ and Sarah, and she will just anonymously ask the question later. So to kick off with just a quick self-introduction, can we start with Manabe-san, please?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Manabe, Katsuhito Manabe. I'm the founder and also CEO of Renewable Japan. And Renewable Japan is a developer and also asset managers and also IPP or investor for renewable energy. And we formed this firm almost 9 years ago, starting from 2%. Right now, we have 200 people. And our asset under management is like right now, like $3 billion. In 5 years, we expecting to be double, $6 billion right now. And also our nature of the business is creating financial product from renewable energies. So whatever we create a plant and we sell it to the financial institution or like investors. That is like our nature of the business is decarbonizations. Okay, this is my introductions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very concise. Jennifer, please.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Sankaguchi. I'm a long-term resident of Japan, and I've been working in marketing and communications for many years across a number of different industries. But for the past 9 years, I've headed up corporate relations for Rio Tinto, the mining company here in Japan. And you know, Japan is a very important customer for us for our minerals and metals. It's also a key supplier of mining machinery and equipment for our operations. And it's also a partner for us in business and innovation. And my role is to manage the external affairs of the companies, our activities here in Japan, our media relations and internal and external communications. And as everyone has mentioned already, climate change is such an urgent topic. And you know, for us as a mining company, you know, what we do impacts climate change, and in turn, our operations are impacted by climate change. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to join this panel, talk a little bit about our climate strategy, but also hear what everyone else has to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tago-san, please.
Thank you, Heather. I am Tadashi Tago. I am the head of the FTSE Russell in Japan. And also I am the head of the information services in Japan for our parent company, London Stock Exchange Group. Today, I will be talking about FTSE Russell because it is more relevant to this topic. But the London Stock Exchange Group is doing many things with various people, including the UK government, etc. By the way, I am joining this call from my home, but there is a kindergarten behind my house, and the children are practicing the undokai every day. I think they are having lunch right now, but once they started practice, it may be very noisy. So please be patient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is probably one of my favorite silver lining points about this crazy year of 2020 is that we have these beautiful human moments within our professional lives, which were all very polished and very serious, and normally we would never have happen. But occasionally a cat will come crossing by me. So we're in the same boat. Thank you, Tago-san. Now, to kick off, of course, this is a huge topic, and I think now the audience is very aware of the very different types of points of view that can come across here. And I think they're all dramatically relevant for this. And we specifically chose them for their ability to look at decarbonization from a very different point of view. And thank you again to the panelists for donating your time for this. We're going to kick off with Jennifer. And one of my top questions, really is, when you consider the environment and decarbonization, it's a huge topic, and Rio Tinto would have a pretty large risk profile when you look at it. What are your top priorities? And can you give me some kind of example of what you're doing to mitigate the risks?
Sure, thank you, Heather. But before we talk about decarbonization, if I could just say one thing. I think probably a number of people in the audience today are aware of the announcement that Rio Tinto made last week. Our CEO and a couple of top executives are stepping down from the company, and felt I'd just like to talk about that for a quick second. This was a result of Rio Tinto as part of one of our iron ore expansion plans, destroying a couple of important Aboriginal heritage sites in Western Australia. And the details are all on our website, so you can read those if you have any interest. But the bottom line is that it shouldn't have happened. And we have apologized unreservedly. And while the board undertook a review of everything that led up to this happening, from the time that we'd actually gotten permission from the government and from traditional owners years ago to do that. But they determined that while no one individual was responsible for what happened, after talking to a number of significant stakeholders, it really became clear that in order to really start, rebuilding our reputation and our relationships with communities, that we needed to have some executive accountability for this. And so our CEO and two top executives will be stepping down. Now, that doesn't change at all. It probably intensifies our commitment to our overall sustainability agenda and our communities. And a big part of that is climate change and decarbonization. So if I could then move to what our priorities are, I should start probably by talking a little bit about what our strategy is. We're a mining company, and we're committed to being part of the solution to the climate change challenge. And our purpose, a lot of people have heard me talk about this already, our purpose is to produce and supply the materials that are essential to human progress. Now that means also the materials that are essential to our low carbon future. And if you think about, the clean energy technologies that we need to get there, for example, wind, solar, hydropower, these all need large amounts of minerals and metals that companies like Rio Tinto produce in order to work. Copper for electrification. EVs need 46 times as much copper as your conventional, internal combustion car. Aluminum for lightweighting to build EVs, and it's infinitely recyclable, so that's great. Iron ore for steel to build energy efficient infrastructure, and the minerals that we need for batteries and that sort of thing. So we believe we are an important part of that solution. And so our priorities really are in line with our strategy, which is to first produce the materials essential to a low carbon future, which I've just mentioned, to reduce our own carbon footprint in our operations. And for example, 2 years ago, we completed the sale of all of our coal mines. So today we are the only major diversified mining company that is not involved in fossil fuel extraction. And we're a big user of renewable energy. Today, 76% of the power that we use at our managed operations comes from renewable sources. And I believe this is probably 3 times the proportion in the global grid of renewables. A third point is to partner to reduce our carbon footprint across our value chains, because it's not just what the emissions that we produce in our operations, but then as our products go on to our customers and then eventually to the consumer in many cases, there's carbon being emitted all through those value chains. So how can we partner to mitigate that. And I can talk later, perhaps about some really exciting partnerships that we have going on right now. And then the last piece is enhancing our resilience to physical climate risks. We have operations, mines and processing centers all around the world. And, they impact, as I said earlier, climate change, but they also are impacted by climate change. So this is, critical for us. And this climate change strategy is really at the heart of our business. It's overseen by our head of strategy, who oversees all of our strategy. And you can't have a discussion at Rio Tinto today without talking about, if you're talking about business development or strategy, you can't do it without talking about environmental impacts. And that's not new for us. We've been using carbon pricing to evaluate business scenarios since 1998, so a couple of decades ago. And so today, we feel we're well positioned for the transition to a low carbon economy. I hope that that's helpful. I can give you more examples later, but
yeah, that's
the stage.
It's fantastic. And sneakily, I asked a very big, difficult question. So that's always a challenge. And I know, because I fielded some questions ahead of time, and even having Rio Tinto on something that is involved in sustainability, people are like, oh, but they're evil. And I'm like, well, are you willing to do without all of the things that their company helps provide? Or are you willing to have somebody really pivot their business model and say, yeah, we recognize the problems, we're trying to fix it? Personally, I'm a big fan of engagement and engagement changing companies as opposed to just dropping them completely. That said, when you look at, and I just want to piggyback on what Jennifer had just pointed out from that investment standpoint, which is really, really fascinating. We have both Manabe-san and Tako-san are deeply involved in this in different ways. I want to turn this over to Tako-san for a moment, because when you're looking at companies such as Rio Tinto, but not specifically, not to call them out, you help us, and us by the way of consultants and investors, really try and evaluate how companies are doing from an ESG perspective. And I know from personal experience how ultimately difficult and challenging this is. And I've also worked with FTSE for a long time to see how the ratings have actually changed over time. Similar with MSCI, Dow Jones, Sustainalytics, everyone has tried to kind of up their game over time because this is a changing field. So Tako-san, what I want to ask is, from your perspective, how are environmental activities related to decarbonization? How are these really evaluated by FTSE Russell? What would be the key metrics that would be very important for you?
Okay. The FTSE Russell is a provider of the investment-related information. It could mean the indexes for the equity and fixed income. It could mean the ESG rating data, or the whatever the data related to the potentially the affecting the investment decisions. And to us, the information is needed because investors need to understand the risk and opportunities coming from the various the investments. So, for example, we are calculating the FTSE Russell ESG rating for almost 20 years. We are one of the first company which produced the ESG rating and index based on the ESG ratings. ESG, as everyone knows, that refers to the environment, society, and governance. And environment could mean a couple of different things. In our methodologies, we have 5 major themes under environment, including climate change, water security, biodiversity, pollution, resources, and the supply chain related to environment. But so the climate, however, the climate change is becoming the most significant the risk for the global economy, as well as the asset managers, asset owners, and of course corporations like Rio Tinto. So when we analyze the climate-related exposure, etc., we look at many different things. For example, for their point, we look at something like actual operational GHG emissions, or the short-term and long-term GHG emissions target, or Jennifer from Rio Tinto mentioned, it is very important for companies to have a very clear strategy how to handle the changes related to climate. So that we also evaluate how the company is involved in the management and opportunities for the climate changes. For example, we want to see the companies both actually oversight the climate changes. We want to see that if the companies have a very clear defined climate risk management procedures, etc., etc. And these indicators, actually there are about 40 separate indicators related to climate changes. They are aggregated into some kind of scores, which are finally aggregated into the ESA scores later. So, and we also analyze company activities from the various sources. And for example, we actually calculate and evaluate the GHG emission data, as I said. And also we look at the fossil fuel reserves, which means some companies businesses dependent on the fossil fuel, including coal and oil and gas, etc. And recently, we updated something called the Green Revenue Data Model 2.0. This is another important aspect because if you look at the green GHG emission reduction, etc., that means potential loss to the companies and the companies beyond there in the future. At the same time, we want to evaluate and show the investor universe something more positive. So the green revenue is to measure the new opportunities coming from the anything related to the green. So it could mean that something like new energy generation, more efficient usage of energy, or the more efficient resource utilization, etc., etc. So we want to, as I told earlier, we want to communicate both downside risk and the potential upside opportunity to the investor, so that investors can make much better decisions. So also everyone knows that the EU taxonomy is implemented, and the country like UK, etc., are now figuring out how to align with EU taxonomy, which is very strict in nature. But at the same time, we think as the former Bank of England, the Chairman Mark Carney mentioned, in reality, there are many different shades of greenness. So sometimes the black and white solution doesn't necessarily work. So we incorporated such kind of the spectrum of the greenness into our model, so that if you want to strictly be aligned with the EU taxonomy, you can utilize some kind of data. But if you want to understand more the broader picture, you may want something different. So we want to get the data, analyze, and deliver data to both asset managers, asset owners, and the potential to the corporations, and so that facilitate everyone to understand the risk of opportunities coming and caused by the climate changes.
Absolutely. So the next time anybody asks me, why is it so difficult to just tell me how well a company is doing, I'm going to send them directly to Tago-san, and Tago-san can again explain how detailed and how terribly difficult it is to evaluate. And the system that he's using now, because I've had the pleasure of looking at your data as well as some of your competitors' data, it really has changed. It has changed over time. And one of the things that you see, I think, a lot anywhere where sustainability is involved is that nobody is sitting down and waiting and saying, we've got it. We're sorted. We're done now. We all know that we're really on the back foot. We have to be stronger. We have to increase our activities. We have to move forward in a way that makes more sense. And I do like that the many shades of green. I love that. That's really fantastic. I want to take it over to really, the asset manager side with Manabe-san. Now, clearly, your part of your business has evolved because of this big climate crisis, and you've created an amazing opportunity. And with 3 billion under management at the moment, 5 billion moving forward, if your growth is going to be as predicted, you certainly see a market, an important market here. So what I'd love to hear from you is, what do you think are really some of the biggest risks and challenges? And maybe on the positive side, what are the big opportunities that you see from your perspective?
Okay, so as I mentioned, Renewable Japan is like asset managers and also developer for renewable business, especially solar, and also investors. So we have 3 hats. And so I wanted to say 3, like, you mentioned like a biggest risk, but I would say 3 risks. One is like a climate change, meaning natural disasters. 2, especially this is like we have to maintain a plant, solar plant or like a wind plant. We have to maintain those plants. So we have to face the natural disasters. And also asset management perspective, and also investors' perspective, interest rate. I would say interest rate. And the third, generally speaking, government policy. So let me explain each of those. Natural disasters. Japan is a lot of like natural disasters: earthquake, typhoon, and also heavy rain, and also sometimes tsunami. And unfortunately, we are not able to control that. But we have, we can have a more stronger plant, and we could avoid some of the way, or if we can manage maintenance well, maybe we can help that. But in Japan, we have like have a lot of like natural diseases in Japan, so we have to live with that. And also interest rate. This is very, very important. Globally, interest rate is so low. Government trying to save Japanese tax burden, meaning that in order to help renewable energies, basically we use government tax. So they wanted to reduce the tax as much as possible. But at the same time, they wanted to expand renewable energies. And so in order to do that, the project cost has to be lower. At this moment, if you create a solar plant, project IRR is almost like a 3%, or maybe 2.5%. It's pretty low. Back to like 2012, when FIT introduced, project IRR is almost like 5%. So right now, like less than 3%. So look, if the interest rate is going almost zero right now, then if the interest rate goes up to like 3%, no one wanted to invest in solars, meaning that we have no growth in renewable energy in Japan. I would say this is the biggest risk, one of the biggest risks. Third, government policies. And FIT and it's coming to FIP feeding premium, or we have to live with like a non-FIT. FIT will not exist, but we have to expand the business. These are hugely dependent on government policies. Once like FIT feeding entire system introduced, and the market was dramatically increased. This is a good thing. But every single years, and because the FIT is decreasing, and no one wanted to keep continue to business for solars or wind, and market itself is expanding, but there are negative pressure from especially press, and no one wanted to keep continue to grow of the renewable business. But I think from this year, as the market consensus or market environment has changed because of government push, and government policy has changed. Actually, they passed a new law, energy law, and they want to government wanted to have a message. They wanted to increase renewable energy in Japan. So even though they had this risk, but I think the government I think, trying to support renewable energies in terms of policy. That's the opportunity in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree. I think this harkens back to one of the points that Tova made in the beginning, and Sue had mentioned as well, is that this is not a problem that we can solve, or an opportunity set even that we can take advantage of by ourselves. We need a various group of players in different levels to be involved. And one of the points that Manabe-san just made, he said this year, and I've avoided the dreaded COVID term until this very moment, but one of the things that I've noticed this year, 2020, we all began 2020 expecting it to be a very pivotal year for sustainability. I think it has been, but not exactly in the way that we really anticipated. Naysayers of sustainable activities, from shareholders to other sorts of stakeholders, really took this moment, I think, to say that the sustainability agenda is a nice to have, and it's going to get pushed to the background. Anecdotally, and in other sessions the BCCJ has held, I've not seen that to be the case. But let me ask the panelists, I think it's pretty clear it's not stopped Manabe-san from moving forward. But Jennifer, has COVID made any impact on your sustainability agenda, either by decelerating or accelerating it, or nothing at all?
Short answer to that is it has not. Now, obviously, COVID has had an impact on our business to some extent. You know, people not being able to move around. We had to implement different protocols to make sure that our people can stay safe, antibody testing and so forth. But all of our operations have continued to run during the crisis, and we continue to deliver those essential products to all of our customers, including here in Japan, and contributing to economies and communities, which is really vital. And fortunately, we've been able to progress our decarbonization activities unimpacted by the COVID situation. Earlier this year, we announced new targets for our carbon emissions reductions, and we also announced that we would be investing $1 billion over the next 5 years into R&D and projects to mitigate climate change, to get us to those targets. And we've been going ahead with those projects this year, expanding our renewables, and also expanding partnerships. So we're very fortunate in not having had to pull back there.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that. Tako-san, I don't know how this would affect. Would COVID, or has COVID affected the way that you're looking at ratings and measurements for companies?
Not yet. We are updating the how to measure the government companies on annual basis. We have some governance procedure for the ESG rating methodology, which is updating our methodologies periodically. For example, most recently, we are updating our climate measurement, make it more aligned with TCFD disclosure standard, for example. But we haven't changed anything related to COVID-19. At the same time, we, as a part of the annual review process, we are contacting the thousands of companies on an annual basis, and including the 1,300 Japanese companies. Because our review process just happened during the COVID-19 process, we initially thought maybe many companies may not be able to provide answers or feedback to our inquiries. So we thought maybe that we need to somehow postpone our review process if the companies are having a lot of difficulties. But actually, to our surprise, only a very small number of companies, maybe just 1 or 2 companies, that told us that we are not able to provide enough the disclosure about the ESG or climate change. And even if they have a lot of difficulties, I think most companies are trying to do something they want to do even before the COVID-19 started.
I am so delighted to hear that, but it also indicates very important structural change within Japanese companies. I think many years ago, sustainability, though important, was probably the second or third job that one person was doing. Whereas I've seen over time, certainly my EY team has grown, but our clients' teams have grown too. So you do have people that this is their full-time commitment to be paying attention. And certainly if you've seen a FTSE questionnaire, it is daunting. So it is definitely something that people need to pay some attention to. It's excellent, but yes, it does take some time. Manabe-san, has COVID made any kind of change for you from that investment standpoint?
Yeah. I would say some small negative and also big positive. And negative meaning we finance from either capital market or stock market. And but stock market is not well for our business. And that's why we are not able to finance from stock market at this moment. But still, like a capital market is well, and unlike Lehman shock, and capital market is well moved. So we have no problem to get the financing from capital market. And big positive is like a massive seller globally, especially Japanese solar is well and price well, very high. That's why like global developers wanted to sell their position to the Japanese market. And buyer is like Renewable Japan or like a gas company or like a utilities and many, and also financial institutions. There are so many Japanese buyers and sellers are foreigners. And until like this year, we priced close to $5 of asset. Of course, we don't buy that much, but they are massive sellers. Especially government announced like an emergency period, then there are so many sellers coming to the market and making the auctions. I never see this kind of many auctions in the past. And I think close to like a 10 auctions at the same time. And I think my guy is trying to get, like they are so busy. So I think they have to postpone summer vacation right now. That busy.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, well, there was a few people I think that got summer vacations, but I think that's a great reason to postpone summer vacation right there. Obviously, I'm massively biased. Fantastic. That's such an interesting point of view. Now, I'm aware that I have many more questions, but I'm aware that we're running short on time, and I did promise to try and keep to time. From 1 p.m., we will be starting the breakout sessions. And I do have some final comments I want to ask from the participants on the panel. But before we do that, I would certainly like to open it up to questions from the audience. You're certainly welcome to unmute yourself and to ask the question directly, or please put it in the chat. You can also raise your hand up if you're feeling shy, and Sarah will help me in case I can't see you. So please, are there any questions from the audience at this moment? And BCCJ XCOM members are not allowed to ask a question. It's a new rule I've just established. Only BCCJ membership. Looks like no questions at the moment. No problem. Please think about your questions. I'm perfectly happy to come back to that. So what I'd like to come back to is one of the questions that I had. I'm deciding between kind of the more negative question and the more positive question. It's a tough one. Let's go with a slightly more negative one, just in the sense of, I truly believe that decarbonization is challenging. It is very, very difficult. And I think sustainability as a general agenda can be very difficult, mainly because it requires a lot of change management, and it requires cultural change within your own businesses. So I want to start off with Jennifer. has there been any challenges internally, or what was the development towards becoming sustainable? We at EY have gone through this journey as well, from kind of not really understanding why we need to many years ago to being really what I would consider very, very forward thinking and very active in this area. But that cultural change has taken a long time. How about for you?
No, I think for us, as I mentioned earlier, climate change has been part of our strategy for a couple of decades now. We did do our first TCFD climate change report in 2018. So it's been part of our strategy. And, it hasn't, I don't think it's been perhaps as much of a long-term struggle, because we do see, obviously, the impacts on our business from climate change, but we also see climate change as a huge opportunity because we're in a position to provide the materials that we're going to need to combat climate change and decarbonize going forward. But we have been, making changes. For example, I mentioned that responsibility for overseeing the climate change strategy now sits under one of our head of strategy, which wasn't the case until recently. That's a new appointment. We also have established a Center of Excellence on Climate Change, so that we have technical experts who can, but advise, consult across the business on how best to go about climate change. And I think, we believe in climate change, and that human activity is largely responsible for it, and we have signed up to the Paris Agreement and so forth. So I don't think we've had, perhaps, at least from what I've been able to see, those kinds of recalcitrant problems. But we have continued to escalate and lift up climate change to be really a central part of our strategy. And it's not a nice to have. It's quite essential to everything we do.
I mean, this certainly changed a lot. In 2015, when I came to EY to help build the sustainability team, it was still a little bit of a nice to have, but I have to say the permafrost of middle management is the hardest group of people to change their mind. They're still my problem, but they have gotten better with great strategy and leadership. I see one hand up, and I've got a question for Manabe-san.
Okay.
And so the question is on biomass energy. What do you think about biomass in general as renewable, and are there any biomass energy related plants here in Japan?
Okay. There are two types of biomass. So we use our Japanese materials from wood, and there are like some issues for the mountains. Not many people wanted to maintain mountains. That is the issue. So we have, we need a lot of raw materials. At the same time, it's very hard to find the laborers to help. So I think using a Japanese material is very difficult. At the same time, wood price is getting higher. So small transaction, it's very difficult to do, and we only see limited numbers. But on the other hand, the larger transaction, larger scale of biomass, we are not able to use Japanese materials, meaning that we will import raw material from like Asia or US or Canada or blah, blah, blah. And also that is, one is that we don't use our resources, and we have to depend on other countries, one. And also we have to suffer exchange rate risk. So larger scale transactions, that's great. However, we cannot use Japanese materials, and also we have to hugely depend on materials from overseas. And also we have the foreign exchange. And also after FIT was finished, and many of the investors saying, what are you gonna do? And they're gonna use coal, meaning that it's going backwards. okay, renewable energy through like go back to coal. So you know, it's not right. And that's why, and we have to think of the other way to make it. But at this moment, renewable energy's leadership is like wind and also solar. But I'm the chairman of the renewable energy organizations. That's not only for solar and wind, biomass, and also like geothermal and others. So we have to think of the way to make it. But anyway, but this is my observations.
That's really useful to hear, because I think a lot of people get stuck on solar because it's a very approachable and understandable renewable energy, or wind, offshore wind. But there is a very large variety in the matrix. And it's not going to take one to solve this problem. I believe Phil had his question, or had a question, burning question from the bridge of the Starship Enterprise.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. A very interesting discussion so far. My question is, the conversation on sustainability usually focuses on larger organizations, but do you all have any tips about how small businesses, such as my own, can contribute to the sustainability initiative?
If anyone, actually, I'll jump in because I work with companies of all sizes, and maybe one of our panelists. Understanding very deeply what your risk factors are and what your areas of influence are, I think, is step one. I've had companies in the past who were very passionate about an area of sustainability that they actually don't really impact. It's okay to do that, but it's not really balancing out your issues. So understanding your materiality and how your stakeholders view you. And that can be done with a lot of different types of engagement to understand what from their perspective, what are the issues? And maybe these are non-issues, maybe there's misunderstanding, or maybe there's some deep issues there that you can impact. I'm personally of the belief that there is no project too small. And I feel like in the past, we've looked at investments into sustainable businesses and thinking that the projects are too small. In the past, they were, to make a big impact. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It is growing, but every activity moves us forward. Do the panelists have a point on this that they'd like to address?
Heather, there's nothing really that that I could add to that, but I think you're right that you need to look at where you can make the most impact. And as a large company, we try to do that. It is a small office. We try to look for partnerships, for example, in Japan. How can we work with our customers? How can we work with customers of customers to help them with their supply chains and sustainability and supply chains? So it's, I think, as you're saying, it's materiality, and it's also how do you work with different partners, because you can't do it alone.
I think that's an excellent point. I always have way more questions than I ever have time, because I'm a very curious person, and I see there's some great ones coming in here. Hopefully some of you can ask your questions in the breakout sessions that are next. I see one of our newly published authors, Miss Ortiz here, has a question. I'm so sorry, Angela, I can't get to it, but if you guys check out Place to Grow 8 Principles That Will Make You an Effective Leader in Social Impact, I think that hits some of the topics that we're thinking about here. I think that a good point to end on is that idea of partnership, that idea that we all have our role to play. And just as Phil's comment really made me think, no part is too big or too small. And I think in the breakout sessions, hopefully we can find some synergies that either on a personal level or a professional level, we can perhaps pull together. My deep thanks and gratitude to BCCJ for helping us select this really fantastic group of people. Manabe-san, Tago-san, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time and your energy and for your work in this area. I wish you all the greatest success. I turn now over to my colleague, Tova.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather, and thank you again to all the panelists for your time and your input today. I think certainly from my perspective, it's been very, very interesting hearing these different angles on the topic of decarbonisation. And I think that final question from Phil and Jennifer's comments and Heather's as well, they really lead us very nicely into the interactive section, which we're going to move on to now. So today we've got a mix of people in the room. We've got some solo entrepreneurs, we've got small companies, medium-sized companies, we've got large multinational organizations represented. But as we've heard before from several people today already, nobody can do this alone. This is an issue that applies to all of us, and we all need to actively be part of that solution. So, but it's not easy, as Heather said, at all. We've heard from Tago-san, you know, how complex it is to actually think about what is our impact and how do we even start to measure that, and then look at what do we do. So what we're going to do now is to go into breakout rooms. I'm assuming many of you or most of you will be familiar with these, but if not, don't worry. In a moment, you will see an invitation pop up on your screen, inviting you to go into a breakout room. Just go with it. It might feel like you're disappearing into the ether for a little while, but don't worry, you will pop up hopefully in a breakout room. If you have any technical challenges, please just pop a note in the chat to BCCJ Sam or Sarah, and they will be able to help you with those. I'm also just putting in the chat now, you can see a link, and this, if you click that link, should hopefully take you to a Google Slides document, which I've set up so that everybody can access and everybody can edit. Hopefully, there may be some people due to restrictions security-wise who are unable to do so, but at least if a few people in your breakout room are able to access this document, that is your place for gathering all of the output, the discussion there. So before I introduce what we're actually going to be discussing, the questions, just to let you know, there'll be 5 breakout rooms. Each one will have a member of the BCCJ Responsible Business Task Force as a facilitator in there. We're not there to lead the discussion, we're there simply to keep things on track. It's really your space to discuss. I've realized that right at the beginning of this event, I completely forgot to introduce myself, which was very unprofessional of me, so sorry. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tova Kinooka, co-founder and director of Global Perspectives. So we're a sustainability development consulting company. And I'm also part of the BCCJ's Executive Committee and Responsible Business Task Force. So I've been working with the team to produce this event here today. So I will be one of the facilitators in the room. We also have Ian Ferguson from Lloyd's. Ian, are you there somewhere? Online, wonderful.
I am, hello.
Super, okay, thank you. We also have Kentaro Kiso from Barclays.
Yeah, I do have it.
Okay, wonderful. Richard Lyle from Intralink.
Hi.
Great, okay, thank you, Richard. I will be leading one room, and also David Bickle, One Lucky Room will have David Bickle, our BCCJ president, as their facilitator. David.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, wonderful,
I'm here.
super. Okay, so those are your facilitators. Now let's look quickly at the questions before we go into those rooms. So you should find this document when you click that link, and you can see here we've got the discussion brief. So we're going to go into these rooms for around 30 minutes, and the idea is that we're going to be splitting it into 2 halves. For the first around 15 minutes, please look at questions 1 and 2, and then question 3, sort of the remaining time there. When we come back to the main room with everybody together, we will ask just one person from the group, not the facilitator, one of the BCCJ members or participants here today, to just briefly share the findings from that room. So you can see the discussion questions here. So questions 1 and 2. One is from what we've just been listening to in the panel discussion there. What do you have you heard about the obstacles and challenges related to decarbonisation that really resonate with you, perhaps for your business or at a personal level? And are there perhaps other challenges that did not come up in the panel discussion, but that you think are particularly relevant to your industry, your business? The first slide on for your team will be a space to capture the answers to those 2 questions. The third question, and you'll have a separate slide for this, is to then choose one of those challenges or obstacles that you've talked about as a group and really dig down together to look at potential solutions or approaches to tackling this. The idea is that by the end of this session, we want to have some ideas for next steps, way forward. There's a lot of expertise, a lot of experience in the audience today, or in the participants today. So we really want to learn from each other, use our collective brain power to come up with some ideas for moving the needle forwards on this. Okay, so you will all have access to all of this. Please just make sure when you go into your breakout room, look at the team name at the top. So if it says Team 1 at the top of your breakout room, you're working on the Team 1 slides here. If it says Team 2, the Team 2 slides, and so on. Okay. I hope that's all clear. Your facilitators will be able to answer any other questions you have. So without further ado, Sam, if you could open up the breakout rooms, please, and let's get started.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your discussions and opening the rooms now. Okay, bringing everyone back for the second time. We can see a lot of frantic note-taking was just taking place right then. So yeah, lots of great ideas. And yes, I guess I'll pass it over to Tova to facilitate and look into what you guys have been discussing.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So yes, a bit of a lot to fit into the time that we had available. So quickly, let's jump to Team 1. If we could ask, Sam, are you able to do the screen share so everybody can look at what Team 1 have got? And if the Team 1 presenter could very briefly, you don't have to read out everything, but just sort of summarize for us what were the key obstacles that came up, challenges, and your ideas for solutions. So Team 1, onegaishimasu. So Ian, who's okay. The spokesperson for your group?
I'm going to be, I was elected spokesperson through a very interesting little process and ceremony. Okay, so for question 1, obstacles and challenges, what did we hear? We talked about how to accelerate this and the fact that no one can do it alone. And in particular, how do companies get their consumers, get their customers on board with the process? And as an example, we looked back to just yesterday when Apple announced officially that they're not going to put the power bricks in with their Apple Watches and probably the phones coming up. There's been a lot of controversy about this over the past couple of months, at least in tech circles, saying that they're just being greedy, but they pointed out that by not doing this, they can cut carbon emissions the equivalent of removing 55,000 vehicles from the roads annually. So it just raised the question of how do you communicate the reasons that you're doing things in an effort to become carbon neutral to your consumers to manage their expectations and help them understand how it's beneficial for them, for the planet, and it's not just corporate greed or seeking money. So that was number 1. Number 2, we talked about how we raise awareness among the general public in Japan of the reasons for needing to make changes to reduce carbon emissions, in particular things such as the fact that you have to pay for bags now, and the process that led up to that and how it was phased in by some companies over the course of several years. education on recycling, why it is important to separate plastic from regular trash, for example, and also is it possible to make consumers greener through subtle change so they don't really realize they're becoming greener? I think the example of paying for bags in stores and using eco bags instead supports that process of phasing it in over time. Mm-hmm. And that all came back to how do you get people on board and what would be critical mass to make it effective, because just getting half the people on board obviously is not going to be enough. Okay, going to the next one. So ideas and solutions. Again, we talked about education and raising awareness of the general public, how to get people on board, how to explain in simple terms what it means to have a successful decarbonization campaign, and what is the impact on future generations. And we talked in particular about grassroots level education, for example, teaching younger students in elementary school or middle school why it's important so that it becomes part of their normal routine. And maybe they can even influence their parents to become greener. And also, of course, it should be part of university curriculums. And also government funding, getting the government more on board, having the government do more official promotional activity would be very helpful. And then manufacturers thinking deeply about how they can reduce, for example, packaging. We've seen cases recently, for example, with water or tea, of just getting rid of labels completely, and we talked about that. And the challenges that might present in terms of communicating with consumers so everyone understands what's going on, they feel comfortable with it, they feel comfortable with the safety, and so forth.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So some really interesting points there, talking about not only the sort of practice, the structures, if you like, that are necessary, but also getting people engaged, hearts and minds, and understanding why. So thank you, team one. Over to team two. If we could move on there, please. Kiso-san, who's your speaker here?
That would be me.
Okay.
Okay, so in our group, we focused on the types of green energy that are available and the types of green energy that Japan is focusing on and perhaps not utilizing as much as it could be. So we looked at the heavy reliance on solar energy, for example, and the other ways that we could maybe spread that out to make sure that Japan is using more kinds of energy. There's a high expense, of course, of wind. We also talked a little bit about the challenges of maximizing offshore wind specifically. So why not that being possible considering the deep sea shelf that Japan has. We talked about the possibility of tapping geothermal energy and new generation of nuclear power plants, and also hydroelectric power. So although the hydroelectric power is not so widely used across Japan as other forms of energy, there are pockets of success stories. For example, Yakushima in Kagoshima Prefecture is 100% powered by hydroelectric energy, and that growing awareness of the benefits that the island has enjoyed from that 100% green energy is really driving other sustainable activities on the island. For example, the uptake of electric vehicles, the use of biomass, the use of more organic and sustainable farming methods, and so on. So that was I guess a challenge and a benefit that we saw. So moving on to solutions. Yes, we looked at the one solution as community-led activity. So for example, in the area of biomass, this was touched on in the panel discussion earlier, but of course Japan struggles with supplying woody biomass to its large plants, as was mentioned, but the small plants in Japan where they have been able to get a local supply of wood biomass have been led by communities. So one way of ensuring that there's more uptake of sustainable activity would be to promote the education of local people and to ensure that they know the benefits of how green energy is going to benefit them and how they can get involved. There are small biomass schemes in parts of Hokkaido, for example, whereby it's a local community that is maintaining the forest and ensuring that it is being sustainably managed for biomass use. This has not been possible in other parts of Japan because of the aging society and lack of labour available for forest management, but community-led activity would be able to help this further. We also talked about the need for strong political leadership to address some of the issues that Japan faces in maximising its green energy use, the need for a strong will and demonstration to bring large-scale change to Japan, the need for cross-party support, and somebody to be a real ambassador in government to lead the way and encourage others to follow. We also touched on the idea of disaster release finance and the possibility that Tokyo could develop as a center for new types of finance that really looked at disaster relief, as of course Japan is really struggling with natural disasters throughout every year as we go forward. And we also just discussed carbon credits and how that could be explored further.
Brilliant. Okay, wow, a lot to think about there. Thank you very much, Catherine and Team 2. So moving on to Team 3, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're coming up on the time now, so if I could ask the remaining teams to keep it pretty concise. I know it's interesting stuff, but that would be appreciated. If anybody does need to drop off at 2, that is absolutely fine. But okay, Team 3, over to you, please.
Yes, this is Miyuki-san. I just mentioned about these themes. Regarding the Rio Tinto, for Japan's company is a very success story. So we want to know about how to make it. Because at this moment, the Japanese government had a concrete energy plan, so we cannot do as a, I'm working for the large insurance company and as asset owner, and I'm the head of sustainable finance, so I know the situation right now, so I'm very keen about what they are doing. But comparing with the European policy, there's a lot of rules to give the merit for the financial institutions. But here in Japan, we don't have so much merit at all so far. And the challenge is in our team, there are several consulting people to the Japanese companies. So they always say about Japanese culture totally different from other countries. It's a very old one. And for example, the European companies or the United States companies or the CEO, the leadership make everything. But in Japan, the consensus space, so it takes a lot of time. And also, as you know, if you see the Keidanren's people, there's all men. No diversity at all. And also the generation is very higher than other countries. That's a problem, I think. That's all, thank you.
Okay, did you look at solutions at all here, or?
The solution is one of the way to find out, for example, to compare with the BCC's program on the TV program. There's a lot of climate change program, but in Japan, NHK has only 1 or 2 at all. So the normally people didn't realize what climate change is, and also the how to tackle the SDGs. So the media has a lot of problem. They have to change their ways.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So we're hearing a lot of a common theme here of educating and understanding coming out. So thank you very much to Team 3 for that. On to Team 4, please.
Hi. Team 4 consists of the diversified background people. So a number of the great idea brought in. So I try to concise, but let me start. Obstacle, challenges. Yeah. First, finding the right balance between economic growth and the sustainability activity initiative is a big challenge. By company, country, priority may be different. So this is one of the big challenge to align. Second, taxonomy. I think Togo-san pointed out there is black and white approach, but there may be in between, some between green to brown. So keeping the zero emission as a goal down the line, we can ask ourselves how green we should be. That is one of the challenge. How to get the message across the people in the company so that it connects with them, because only resolved across the collaboration. So this is a very important point and a big challenge. Plastic pollution and the difficulty, innovation and recycling. Recycling is one of the important solution, but this is one of the big difficulty. And the logistics. One of the event coordinator mentioned about this, and the large production item to be sent around to the event sales. And also difficult of that changing, developing new business model. Change isn't easy, need motivation. Motivation incentive is very important to change mindsets and to create a new business model. So this point, motivation incentive, linked to the next slide. And this year, because of the COVID-19, we have a very fortunate outcome. Less travel, almost zero international flight, after COVID-19, how we will resume, and we need to be very smart. If we resume the international travel, we need to be effective and efficient in terms of the carbon emission, and use metrics to understand our impact and where we can reduce it. We should have a comprehensive big picture first, where how we can make an impact and where is the critical point. This is one of the big item for good solution. Carbon tax is a very direct impactful solution to reduce carbon. Recycling, circular business model. This is linked to the first slide, and this is very important to reduce carbon emission. More people focused on solving these issues. People funded position to develop solution, not just tech, but also bigger picture. Tech is an enabler, but we need to look into the large picture, big business model. Make alternatives simple to understand and use so people can change easily. In the end, people need to change behavior. So this is very important, giving a message across all the stakeholders. Last point is that incentive for change for individual and also investors, enterprise, to encourage green behavior, so that all the activity in the market is eco-friendly or greener or like that. So this is output from Team 4.
Okay, thank you very much, Takuchi-san, for that. And if we could move to Team 5, please. final one, onegaishimasu. Who's our speaker here?
I will speak. I try to summarize it really quickly.
Okay, wonderful.
For question 1 and 2, we were also mainly speaking about the fact that right now quite often targets are quite ambitious and maybe a bit far into the future, which makes them unrealistic, and that we need more concrete mechanisms. Also, people don't feel really responsible. So we need basically need them to feel responsible. We fundamentally need them to change their behavior, and we need to create a sense of accountability. And what else? Yeah, I think that's about it. So it's basically about we need concrete measures, and we need people to really change their behavior. That is it in a nutshell. And for the second part, we took up the point about, sorry, can't really see the page. For the second part, which is as one obstacle, the fact that targets are too abstract and too far away, and basically we need to cut it down in really small steps that people can relate to and that they can change in their daily activities, also small enterprises, and yeah, not just in 20, 30 years ahead. Okay, that's about it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Team 5. And I apologize, I've got background noise going on here, but just to let everybody know, you will have access to that document after this session. You can go back and look at these ideas, take more time to think about them. Please also take them back into your own organizations and perhaps use them as a starting point for discussions, or to build on the discussions you're already having on this topic. So if I could now hand over to David, please, for the final words.
Thanks very much, Tova. And if I could just begin by thanking all of our panelists today, Jennifer, Manabe-san, Tago-san, and also Sue for her opening remarks. Greatly appreciate you setting us up for this session today. And also, of course, to my colleagues from the Chamber, particularly Heather and Tova, working on XCOM and also working on our Responsible Business Task Force, to putting all the hard work in today to the logistics and allowing us to run this event. I think there's been some great comments made today in these breakout sessions, but maybe if I can just try and tie things together at a macro level about how this relates to us as people involved in business and also us here at the Chamber. I think there's a number of sort of mega trends we're seeing now that are going to occupy us over the next 3 or 4 years as people doing business in, this post-COVID world, if you like, in this new normal. As everyone will be familiar with, there's a lot of discussion around the future of work, the impact of technology, also about resilience, and I think resilience in many aspects. But a key thing now is people, I think, are understanding that part of this resilience discussion involves a need to be very mindful about how the risks of climate change and sustainability for our business, and how we can build in sustainability to part of our business so that we can address issues related to climate change, which we are recognizing have a direct impact on our businesses. And I think really part of that is COVID has made us realize how vulnerable we are, not only to the health situation, that's the immediate thing at the moment, but I think realizing now how vulnerable we are to greater environmental changes, the way we live our lives, the way we do business. And of course, many of the incentives that governments are coming up now to build back better, as many people are talking about, involve incentives to work towards a more sustainable future. So I think the way that we're going to recover from COVID, the way that we're going to thrive in COVID as we reimagine what our business can look like, it's inextricably linked to sustainability, climate change, and the response to that. So one of our big goals at the Chamber is to create trust and opportunities in bilateral business. And I think climate change and sustainability is one of these beacon themes around which both British and also Japanese companies have some great stories. And it's about sharing those experiences, I think, talking about the difficulties and the successes, that we can all generate that trust, and hopefully, you know, as we find better ways of working, more sustainable ways of working, we'll also generate together commercial opportunities. So this discussion today was only possible because of all of your participation in the event. So in addition to thanking our panelists, Sue, my ex-con colleagues, I'd like to thank all of you for staying engaged throughout these 2 hours. I hope you'll remain engaged in the BCCJ discussion on these topics. Look out for future events, and particularly part 2 of the decarbonisation series when we look at people. So thank you all today for your time. We look forward to continuing this discussion with you.